All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to get started. Thank you for joining us. This is the first in a series of webinars to discuss the new Phase 1 solicitations for the NSF's Small Business Innovation Research and Small Business Technology Transfer proposals, and also known as American Seed Fund. My name is Ben Schrag. I am one of the program directors here in the program, also the policy liaison for our group. I'm joined by my colleague Sarah Kennedy, who's going to help with finding and firing questions at me. Thanks to Sarah for joining us. Before we start here, I'm going to give you just a few logistical notes about the format today. And the first of those is that this session is being recorded. We have a number of slides I'm going to go through at the front here before I take any questions, about 20 slides. It'll take me between 20 and 30 minutes. That section of the presentation here will be recorded, and you will receive a link next week, probably early next week, automatically. That has basically a link to a YouTube recording of the slides section of this webinar. So no need to worry about that. You will have access to the recording if you need to revisit some piece of it. After that first 20 or 30 minutes, where I'll be just talking about some general information, we'll take questions for the rest of the session. And those questions will not be recorded. They will not be sent out. You will not have access to them. Just so anybody is worried about their question being put on the web. So the next thing I'll say is that we have a lot of attendance here today. Thank you. Congrats that there's so much interest in the program. So there are currently, as I sit here, there are about 500 of you. And so what that means is that we're not going to get to all your questions, unfortunately. And so the downside is that, we'll probably get to a lot of good questions that will hopefully help you guys understand the program. Downside is we may not get to your question. I will tell you we're going to cut this session off at 4 p.m. Eastern, regardless of how many questions are left, just because if we try to get to everyone's question, it'll take us till tonight. And I suspect your question is not important enough to wait 6 hours to get the answer. So if you don't get your question answered during the session here today, we'll talk about this later, but basically you would want to send those questions to our general inbox, which is SBIR@nsf.gov. Or if you've been invited to submit a proposal via a project pitch and your question is very specific to the type of science or market that you're looking at, the person who invited your project pitch will probably be the program director who reviews your proposal, who knows your area best. So anything very specific to your area, you can also send to that person who invited your pitch. Any fast lane questions, and I'll revisit this at the end so you don't have to remember this, but any questions about how to use our systems to submit the actual proposal, those can go to fastlane@nsf.gov, or there's an 800 phone number on the masthead of Fastlane that you can call. They're open, I think, from 7 to 7 Eastern time. That number is 800-673-6188. The other thing I'll say is basically to remind you how to ask your questions. We've disabled the chat for all of you. And so if you want to ask a question, you have to use the Q&A tab. You're going to have to type your question. We're not taking audio questions. It's a little bit hard to manage audio and people speaking with this many people. So use the Q&A tab. A couple of just asks from our side with the Q&A tab. If before you write a question, if you don't mind, it's a little bit hard to see them all, but if you can skim the existing questions, if your question is already kind of covered by somebody else, no need to put it in there again. Also, all of you are very polite, and oftentimes when we answer your question, you want to say thank you. And so the only way for you to do that would be to say thank you in the Q&A tab, making a new question. Please don't do that. We appreciate the thank yous, but if you can avoid sending another question that just says thanks for answering my question, that will help us to navigate the large number of questions. Okay, I'm trusting Sarah will jump in if she has anything to say, so I'm going to start into the presentation here. All right, so first thing I want to just point out, our website is seedfund.nsf.gov. I suspect all of you have been there. Most of the really key things we'll talk about today can be found in written format at that site, typically in the apply section. The government likes writing things down, and so most of the things that I say here are found in one of these documents that we create, whether it's the solicitation, our Fastlane step-by-step guide, our FAQ, or one of those. And those are all linked in the Apply tab. So please refer to that if your question is not answered today. Most of the things are covered somewhere. Sometimes it's a little bit hard to find them, but we do have a fair number of resources for you. Okay, so I'm just going to talk very briefly about the overview of the process. And the first step is the project pitch. I'm not going to focus too much on that today because really we want to focus on the deadline that's next week and a full proposal, which is the step that happens after your project pitch. If you have not submitted a project pitch yet, those are accepted anytime. They are submitted again at our website at seedfunds.nsf.gov. They are 2 pages or 3 pages in length. They are always being taken, and they are responded to within typically maximum of about 3 weeks, but typically more like 1 or 2 weeks. And the project pitch is basically just a way for us to get just enough information about what you're hoping to do to figure out if you might be a good fit for the proposal. It's not a review of what you're doing. It's not trying to figure out if you have a good idea or good technology. It's just trying to figure out if you might fit with what we're trying to do. The one thing I'll also say about project pitch is please do not worry about the topic. We do ask you to pick a topic. If you don't pick kind of the right topic, it's not going to affect you. The topic is used really more for us to make sure you're talking to the right person than for us to kick you out or not let you submit. For most of you, I suspect you've already submitted a project pitch and been invited to submit a full proposal, which is the second and final step of our process for phase 1. The other things you'd have to do after that point would be, the first one would be to register your company. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Then prepare your proposal, which we'll talk about in fair detail here today. And just in case anybody has not seen it, we do finally have posted our solicitations for 2021, and we have quarterly windows closing the first Thursday of March, June, September, and December. So I talked a little bit about the project pitch. The one thing I wanted to mention here, just in case people aren't sure, is that for people who have submitted a full proposal before and want to resubmit the proposal, if your proposal was reviewed, if it went through the full merit review process and you got written feedback from external reviewers with your declination, you do need to submit a new project pitch to resubmit that full proposal. If you submitted a proposal and it was returned without review, which means it was probably sent back in the first month or two and you were told that there was something missing or some administrative issue, in that case you do not need to submit a new project pitch. Okay, so we're going to now talk about the full proposal. For those of you who have questions about the project pitch, I would encourage you to take those offline. We're trying to focus on the folks who have a bead on being able to submit a full proposal here in the next week, since our first submission window does close in 6 days next Thursday. So the first thing again that you need to do just to start the proposal is to complete these 4 registrations. Actually, the first 3 are required to start the proposal. The 4th one is not, but we encourage you to do it anyway. The first 3 are also, they're correlated. You have to do them typically in order, I believe. And so one thing I'll say about all these registrations is they are all done through government entities. They are all free. You will never need to have to pay anybody anything to apply to our program. There are third parties out there who do, for a fee, help you with these things, and you're welcome to take advantage of those. But there's nothing that requires you to pay anything to do anything with our program at the NSF. So if somebody tells you otherwise, that is not the case. I think, with questions for these registrations, you should go directly to the associated websites. There's links for where all these things are located in our solicitation, and hopefully associated help desks or call numbers if you are having issues with them. Okay, so NSF has 2 systems they're going to use, typically research.gov and Fastlane. And it's a little bit confusing because there's actually a transition happening between these 2 systems right now. But the important thing to remember is that your proposal, actually putting your proposal together, putting documents in, doing your budget, all those things, that's going to happen in Fastlane. But your actual registration, setting up your company, building your account, all those administrative pieces are going to happen in research.gov. Usually, in most of this process, it's hard to be in the wrong place. If you're in the wrong place, you'll be told pretty quickly. But the one thing I will say is that there are some programs at the NSF that allow you to submit a proposal in research.gov in that site. Our program is not one of them. You cannot submit your proposal to research.gov. You also can't submit your proposal through grants.gov. The only place you can submit a SBIR or STTR proposal at NSF is through Fastlane. And again, that's fastlane.nsf.gov. Okay, so as I mentioned, our solicitations are now live. The solicitation is like the it's kind of like the Bible we have for how to prepare a proposal. That is the official document NSF uses for a specific program like ours. And so, when in doubt, the solicitation is the trump factor in the sense that it is the overriding rule. So, if two documents that NSF has say different things, the solicitation is the one you should follow. That's the one that basically has the official rules about applying to SBIR or STTR. And it is a little bit hard to navigate, but hopefully easier to navigate than the NSF's basic policy document. For those of you who have not seen it, it's called the PAPG, P-A-P-P-G, and it's several hundred pages. And so the solicitation, which is like 30 or 40 pages, is relatively brief. Talk really quickly about the distinction between SBIR and STTR. So these programs are almost identical at this point within NSF. Other agencies, you'll see more differences. Basically, the amounts of money, the cycles, the processes, the criteria, all the things we're looking for are the same for both of these programs. The only difference is basically how the budget is allocated. And this is all set down by Congress. And so both programs are for small businesses. The small business will be the applicant. For an SBIR, the small business is welcome to partner with other organizations or other people, but there's no requirement. The small business could do the entire project inside the business. The small business technology transfer requires the small business that leads the award to partner with a research institution. And a research institution is typically defined as a not-for-profit institution, whose function is to do research. So colleges and universities apply, federal labs sometimes apply, federally funded R&D centers apply, or qualify, I should say. And there's a certain amount of money in the STTR program that has to flow to the small business and a certain amount that has to flow to the research institution, as is mentioned here. So the best way to think about these two programs is the only thing that really you should worry about in deciding which program is more appropriate is looking at your projects and thinking about, in order to best accomplish the work I need to get done, does it make sense to have a university or a research institution do a really big, significant percentage of the work, more than a third? If it makes sense to have a university really do a lot of the work, then an STTR is probably what you want to do. If it makes more sense to have a small business do most of the work, then SBIR is more appropriate. Okay, so again, going back to the solicitation, I just want to point out there's a lot of sections. The real critical section for almost all the questions that you're going to ask is Section 5. Section 5 is about preparing your proposal. And so this covers a Fastlane, and more importantly, it covers all the different pieces you have to put in. And so it's really mostly Section A and B. So that is something that if you have not kind of at least skimmed Section 5, please do so. It should cover all the nuts and bolts of putting together a proposal. One thing I want to mention is a couple changes that are new for this solicitation for those of you who have seen the program in prior years. The project description is kind of the heart of the proposal. It always has been. It's a 15-page max document, and it really makes the key arguments about the commercial and the technical side of things. And this, again, is all replicated from Section 5 of the solicitation, but I do want to point out that the last piece of this has changed. And so what has happened is that there's a new section that has been added to our project description in the format we recommend. and that is the new broader impacts section, which is now the very last page. Broader impacts has always been one of the critical criteria within NSF. It has always been discussed in this project description document, but it has not been a separate section until now. And it is recommended to be one page, and the technical R&D plan, which used to be recommended as 5 to 7 pages, is now recommended as 5 to 6 pages to create space for the broader impacts section. I do have one slide I want to talk about broader impacts very quickly, just because this is new. So I'll talk a little bit more about the broader impacts criteria later, but I want to point out that really the goal of this page specifically is to talk about impacts of the effort that you hope will happen that are not measured by kind of traditional commercial outcomes, right? So most of the impact we're looking for and most of what you're talking about is NSF funds your project, you develop your product or service, and you manage to get to market, you sell your product, you license your product, people use your product, it solves a problem, it creates revenues, your company can grow, can create jobs, your customers can benefit from your product. These are all kind of the core of the commercialization side of things, and that is our number one. That is kind of our number one way to create outcomes. So the broader impact section is really specifically to talk about if you do get to market, if you are commercially successful, what other impacts might happen that are important to society that are not these traditional commercial impacts, right? So there's a lot of different ways that can happen where there are kind of more intangible things that result from your project. For example, your project might help clean up the environment. It might help to educate the next generation of STEM students. It might help solve some other societal problem that is not necessarily measured in dollars. So this is your chance to talk about those things. The section that we mention here, we kind of list a congressional list of goals from a recent legislation that is relevant here. And so there's this list of a number of different kinds of impacts. Those are impacts that are kind of a great way to understand some of the things that might be broader impacts, but it's not intended to be exhaustive, right? If you have a broader impact that is societally beneficial, that is not listed on that list that we give you, feel free to mention it. And also, even more importantly, perhaps, you do not need to have an impact on every one of the different categories that we list, right? We're not expecting your project to have both economic impact and military impact and health impact. Most of you will have great impact, but you're not necessarily going to check every one of those congressional boxes. So don't feel like you need to hit them all. It's not intended to be, a checklist that you have to check everything. The other thing I will say, for those of you who are used to more traditional NSF funding programs, a lot of times with other NSF programs, with the broader impact section, it's common to kind of create new activities, new types of programs within that section as part of your NSF project to kind of create broader impacts. Our program is not expecting you to do that, to basically create new things outside of the normal research you're doing and the associated commercialization activities that we don't pay for, but that we strongly, are hoping that you're working on. So don't feel the need to kind of, you're welcome to do that, but we're not expecting you to say create new educational modules or something like that. All right, so again, back to section 5. The one thing I want to cover is budget. Budget is a very common source of questions. We get a lot of questions around budget. The one thing I want to say on budget is, we appreciate you trying to get it right, but very often, almost in every case, if we're going to fund you, we can work with you to fix your budget or change your budget. So do your best with the budget, but please do not let budgetary questions slow you down or especially to halt the submission of your proposal. The budget is important, but it's something that is typically not the reason your proposal is funded or not funded. And as I mentioned, it's something we need to fix anyway. So do the best you can on the budget, but don't get torn up and feel like you need to be perfect, right? Most of the applications we get are from first-time submitters. Most of the phase 1 awards we make are to first-time submitters. And as you can expect, they don't always have perfect budgets. So don't overestimate how important budget perfection is in our process. One other section of the proposal I want to talk about very quickly, because it's relatively, there's been some changes, is that there's new forms for the biographical sketch and current pending support. There's required forms you have to use, and again, these are discussed. Fastlane is not going to let you submit your proposal fully without having these documents included. I will point out, though, that for the biographical sketches piece, you're actually allowed to, you still need to actually, create a form based on the NSF format, but you can actually leave that kind of blank or put, I think we tell you to put NA into the fields. And instead of filling out your bio sketch into the format that NSF uses, you can actually upload a CV or a resume into the other supplementary documents section. So you would fill out the form that we give you. You would just make it NA for every section. But then for each of the people who require a biographical sketch, which is PI, the co-PI, and everybody who's a senior person, you would then include their resume or their CV as a supplementary doc. And again, this is all discussed in the Fastlane step-by-step guide, which is linked at the bottom here. But it is a new piece, and it is something that's been a little bit confusing for folks. I don't have to stress again. Use Fastlane. I guess we really wanted to make this point. Okay, one other section of our site that's very helpful when you're in the depths of proposal creation is the resources tab. And this is another place to find our FAQ, which is quite extensive. Our Fastlane guide, the step-by-step guide I just mentioned, and a whole bunch of other things. So when in doubt, if you can't find something, it may be on the resources tab. Okay, I think the review criteria have been the same. They're discussed in a lot of places, but I want to use this slide just as a way to give you maybe a 2 or 3 minute summary of the really critical, the way that we think about these 3 criteria, because we do think about them a little differently than other programs who use these criteria. So the most important thing is really in phase 1. The first thing we look at with respect to intellectual merit is innovation, is a new differentiated technical approach. An approach to solve a problem with some kind of new technical approach, some kind of new technology, where the technology itself is both, quite different from the ways that people have addressed that same problem. The technology is hopefully disruptively better if it works, and that it's unique to your company, and that in the sense that not just has nobody else built that technology, but if your company successfully builds it, there's pretty good reasons to suggest that nobody else could even kind of replicate what you're doing, that there's some core piece of it that is unique to you and that allows you to create a barrier to entry for competitors, right? So a technical silver bullet that will make your company successful in the market, even though there's bigger, more established companies trying to compete with you. The other side of the coin of intellectual merit is risk, right? So we're going to give you money to do research and development. You have new technology. In order to be a good fit for us, you not only need to have new technology, you need to show that R&D is really critical, that you have a lot of risk. The technology has not been proven out yet. It still might not work. The product might not work. And R&D is a way to get past that hump, right? So if you have an innovative technology, but you know it's going to work, you've kind of figured out how to make it tick, you just want to kind of move to the next step of a product, that may not be a good fit for phase 1. Broader impacts I talked about, but again, I want to stress that, we look at these things in a lot of ways like an investor would look at. We're looking at the outcomes that we're looking for are your company to be commercially successful. The broader impacts are really important because some of you especially have technologies or products that have a fairly narrow market. They might not have $1 billion market. They might be solving a fairly specific problem for a fairly small, narrow, specialized type of customer. That's fine. We don't need $1 billion market, but if your market is relatively small or obscure, it's especially important to show that you have potential impacts that are broader than just the dollars that you're going to bring in, right? So my market is not big, but I can help I can create assistive technology that helps people with disabilities or helps to educate, certain kind of students, and other things, right? So broader impacts are really about talking about these intangibles, and they're very important when the commercial side of things is not eye-popping. The last category is commercial potential. Again, this is very similar to what an early stage investor looks for. We're looking for you to understand a value proposition in a customer and to be able to in a very detailed fashion tell us who your beachhead customers are, what they're worried about, why they can't solve their problem, what they're doing now, and why the problem is important. You want to see that your company is really geared toward commercialization. We're giving you money to do R&D, but our goal is that R&D is going to be the linchpin to you becoming a commercially successful company. So you need to show that your company is organized to really, once we fund this technology and you've been able to make it work in the lab, that your company is really created, structured, incentivized to aggressively commercialize. Because NSF is not going to pay for a lot of the commercial things. We're not allowed to. But we want to see that you're going to take this and run with it commercially if we're able to help you get over the technical humps. And then the last thing I'll say is the last bullet point here. We're looking for our money to really be catalytic. We're looking for our money to significantly alter the trajectory of your company. So if your company is very big, very established, has a lot of prior funding, it's a little bit less likely we'll fund you, just because we want our funding to be catalytic. We want it to really move the needle for your company. And this is the reason why, as you all probably know, we really focus on funding mostly very early stage, very small startups. Okay, the timeline after you submit, after the window closes, this is kind of the rough timeline. In general, you won't hear anything, at least during that first 3 months. Notifications are typically 4 to 6 months after you submit. Recently, they've been a little bit longer because we've had a huge amount of proposals. But in general, there will be a big waiting period here. And you won't be able to actually see any specific sign of progress in our systems, which is always frustrating. The good side is that if you do get, once you do hear something, you're very close to getting a decision. And if you're getting an award, once the decision finally happens, the money is available almost immediately. So things can happen very quickly when the award is made. And obviously, you'll have to hopefully be ready for that if you're ready to hit the ground running. Last thing I'll say is you all probably know this, but this is a phased process. Our phase 2, again, will typically be submitted between 6 and 24 months after your phase 1 starts. It's $1 million, and it sets you up for a number of supplemental funding opportunities, which of which the biggest one is the phase 2B, which is another $500,000. And so again, this is kind of where we get to the almost $2 million of funding that's available. If you do access all of these, you'll be close to $2 million in total funding. Few reminders: registrations take time. If you are on this call and you have not started your registrations, or you have not been invited to submit based on a project pitch, you're probably not going to make the submission window that closes next week. Sorry to say. The Fastlane guide is a great step-by-step once you're in Fastlane and putting your proposal together. Don't sweat the budget stuff. Give yourself extra time. And the last thing here, which I haven't mentioned yet, is that the thing you need to look for to know that you're actually done and you've submitted your proposal is that you're going to be assigned a new proposal number at the very end of the process. It's going to be 7 digits. It's going to start in the 2-digit fiscal year. And so for all of you, for the next several months, when you submit your full proposal, you'll be given a number starting in 2-1. If you have not been given that number, you are not done. You are not going to get that number until you're done. You're only going to get that number when you're done. And so if you have not seen that number, do not relax. You probably have missed a step. There's a step at the very end that oftentimes gets people where you have submitted the proposal, but you won't have submitted it to us. You'll have submitted it to what NSF calls the AOR, which is the Authorized Organizational Representative. That is actually somebody who's at your company. And so what you've done is you've actually given somebody else at your company, it could even be you, the authority to take a proposal that the PI was working on and officially submit it. So you have to make sure you hit that what we call the AOR step at the end, and then you'll be assigned this proposal number. So please look for that proposal number as the best sign that you have gotten through the process. All right, that's all of my preliminary comments. I see we have a lot of questions. I just want to remind you to please use the Zoom Q&A to ask a question. If we don't answer your question or we misunderstand it, you can also use Q&A to follow up. You have to probably create a new question. If you do not get your question answered today, the 2 email addresses here are the best places to go after the fact.